Hello, I'm Antonio Carpintero, and this is a presentation about the paper I've written titled Prioritization and Management in Agile. Here is the outline of the presentation. It follows also the same outline that is in the paper. But first, to have a common definition, I would like to read a description of Agile. Agile is the ability to create and respond to change. It is a way of dealing with and ultimately succeeding in an uncertain and turbulent environment. The authors of the Agile Manifesto chose Agile as the label for this whole idea, because that word represents the adaptiveness and response to change, which was so important to their approach. I want to emphasize in the idea of responding and adapting to change for an uncertain and turbulent environment. It's because of this necessity of adapting to a turbulent environment that different methodologies have arisen as effective. In this presentation, we are going to see these four and the way they do management of requirements. To briefly describe them, we have first, Scrum, with its focus on sprints as a way to divide work. Second, Lean, which derives from the working paradigm from the manufacturing environment. Thirdly, we have Extreme Programming, or XP, that targets speed and simplicity with short-term development cycles. And fourthly, we have Kanban, with its more visual representation of the task to be done that comes from real-time communication of capacity and full transparency of work. But before we see the management techniques in the different methodologies, I want to talk about the prioritization techniques used in Agile and present them as they might come handy in our careers as software engineers. First, we have ranking, which, using a ordinal scale to rank the requirements, you assign a different numerical value to each requirement depending on its importance. Works best when dealing with a single stakeholder. Second, we have numerical assignment, or grouping, based on categorizing requirements into several priority groups, each of which represents something relevant to stakeholders, for example, critical, moderate, and optional. Third, we have Moscow method, that uses 4 priority categories instead of numbers: must have, which is mandatory, should have, of high priority, could have, preferred but not necessary, and don't have, can be postponed as and suggested for future implementation. Fourth, we have bubble sort technique. As with bubble sorting, you take 2 requirements and compare them, sorting them, then all the requirements. This works really well when it's difficult to prioritize all the requirements. For fifth, we have $100 method that can be used whenever several stakeholders needs to vote democratically on the most important criteria. Each stakeholder is given an hypothetical $100 to divide among the requirements. This, at the end, results in a prioritized list of requirements at the end. Sixth, we have Kano analysis, a question-based method where participants are prompted to assess their satisfaction if a particular feature is present and their dissatisfaction if the feature is absent. Through this iterative questioning process applied to each requirement and facilitated by a matrix, requirements can be systematically categorized and prioritized. This technique becomes particularly relevant when dealing with a large number of stakeholders or when consensus on prioritization is challenging to achieve. Seventh, we have Analytic Hierarchy Process, or AHP. In this technique, stakeholders decompose their objective into more manageable sub-problems structured in a hierarchical form. Post-hierarchy creation, decision makers assess elements by systematically comparing them in pairs. AHP suggests a total number of comparisons at each hierarchy level, which is calculated as n times n minus 1 divided by 2, where n represents the number of requirements. Participants then express judgments on the relative significance of each aspect, often informed by data. Subsequently, numerical values are assigned to each hierarchy element based on their priority. Eighth, we have the 5 whys. Stakeholders often express a desire to implement a feature driven by reasons that may not align with logical arguments or the best interest of the company. Utilizing the 5 whys methods, the analyst systematically questions the stakeholders about the necessity of the demand, repeating the why inquiry up to 5 times or less. This iterative process aims to uncover the underlying importance of the requirements. And last and ninth is a prioritization based on value, cost, and risk. It's a quantitative approach, specifically employing a cost and penalty-based method. Each requirement is assigned numerical values corresponding to penalty, cost, and risk. Now, entering the management of requirements in Agile, we are going to use as a guide the paper titled Requirement Management in Agile Software Environment, which is referenced in the slides. This paper talks about how this management is used by the different methodologies we presented before. Starting with extreme programming that takes a distinctive approach to requirements by utilizing user stories and engaging in on-site customer interactions. Written cards serve as flexible promises for conversation, with no strict requirements for completeness. Post-implementation, story cards are discarded, reflecting XP's iterative and adaptive nature. Scrum, similar to XP, places emphasis on user stories for requirement definition. The product owner assumes a pivotal role, guiding the team through discussion that shape actual requirements. The collaborative nature of Scrum ensures a dynamic and iterative development process. Following, Lean software development stands out in its user requirements gathering method. Screens are presented to end users for direct input, aligning with the just-in-time production ideology. Small cards of stories initiated by the customer kickstart the process. Developers estimate implementation time, and the work organization transitions into a self-pooling system, fostering adaptability through stand-up meetings. Kanban, on the other side, leverages user stories to understand sprint goals. Each sprint revolves around a single story card, meticulously divided into tasks, categorized as client-side and server-side activities, and further segmented into subtasks. The focus of minimizing sprints items underscores Kanban's commitment to effective project time management. Additionally, we have two case studies that provide insight into requirement prioritization in Agile. In the empirical study called Agile Requirements Engineering Practices and Challenges, an empirical study, the left one, the prioritization of requirements is a critical aspect examined across 16 organizations engaged in Agile software development. The study investigates 6 distinct Agile requirements engineering practices and their impacts on 7 identified challenges. To prioritize requirements, the researchers consider factors such as the frequency and extent of changes, the involvement and competence of customers, and the criticality of requirements. They assess the practices' influence on risk associated with requirements engineering, categorizing them as mitigating, exacerbating, or having mixed effects. The conclusions highlight that Agile requirements engineering practices neither universally solve nor exacerbate challenges, emphasizing the need for a context-specific evaluation. The study provides a valuable framework for understanding the relationships between Agile practices and requirements engineering risks, aiding practitioners in making informed decisions based on their project's unique characteristics. In the case study called Do We Know Enough Requirements Prioritization in Agile Projects, insight from a case study, the right one, the researchers conducted a detailed exploration of prioritization processes in 8 software organizations. This study revealed significant deviations from traditional assumptions in Agile literature. The prioritization process was found to involve complex interactions between client and developers, challenging the widely accepted notion of client-driven prioritization. Contrary to established practices, developers often took the lead in decision-making, especially in inter-interaction scenarios. Additionally, the consideration of negative values emerged as a crucial factor not extensively discussed in Agile literature. The study concludes by highlighting the need to reframe assumptions, adapt Agile approaches to diverse project contexts, and calls for further research to enhance requirements prioritization in Agile environments. To conclude, we have seen the importance of prioritization and management of requirements in Agile, something that, in my opinion, is often overlooked and might lead to an increase in costs and delays. As we have seen in the 2 case studies and the management and prioritization techniques, a good usage of these principles can lead to a better software development, especially in Agile methodologies.